Hey guys, tonight we begin with something Hollywood got spectacularly wrong. When you think of Roman gladiators, your mind probably conjures images of Russell Crowe in Gladiator, a noble warrior seeking vengeance, fighting for honor, earning the respect of emperors. Maybe you picture Brad Pitt-esque heroes, with chiseled abs, dramatic speeches about freedom, and crowds cheering for their beloved champions. Forget all of that. The brutal truth? Being a Roman gladiator was essentially a death sentence, with entertainment value. It was slavery dressed up as sport, human trafficking marketed as heroism. If you were unlucky enough to become a gladiator in ancient Rome, you weren't a hero, you were property. Expensive, temporary property that existed solely to bleed and die for the amusement of people who saw you as less than human. Tonight, we're going to shatter every Hollywood myth about gladiatorial combat and dive deep into the horrifying reality of what it actually meant to fight in the arena. We'll explore the brutal training regimens that broke men's bodies and spirits, the slave conditions that made death seem like mercy, and the cold economic calculations that determined whether you lived or died based on entertainment value. So, before we step into the blood-soaked sands of the Colosseum, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy learning uncomfortable truths about history. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. I love seeing our global community of night owls and insomniacs gathering to learn together. Now, dim your lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey back to ancient Rome. Fair warning, by the end of this story, you'll never look at gladiator movies the same way again. The crackling fire you hear will be our only comfort as we explore one of history's most brutal forms of entertainment. Are you comfortable? Good. Let's begin your transformation from free person to gladiator slave and discover why your life expectancy just dropped to about 25 years. Congratulations. You've just lost your freedom forever. But how did you end up here, chained in a cart rolling toward Rome, your fate sealed before you even understand what's happening to you? Most gladiators weren't volunteers seeking glory. They were prisoners of war, captured during Rome's endless military campaigns across Europe, Africa, and Asia. Picture this. You're a Germanic tribesman, fighting desperately to defend your village from Roman legions. The battle is lost, your family is dead or scattered, and you're one of the survivors rounded up like cattle. The Romans don't see you as a person, you're a resource to be exploited. The slave traders examine you like livestock. They check your teeth, feel your muscle tone, assess your height and build. Are you strong enough to put up a good fight? Young enough to potentially survive multiple bouts? Attractive enough to draw crowds? These cold calculations determine your price and your fate. If you're lucky, you'll be sold to work in mines or farm. If you're unlucky, you'll be marked for the arena. But prisoners of war weren't the only source of gladiators. Common criminals, thieves, murderers, deserters, were routinely sentenced to gladiatorial combat. In Roman law, this was called damnatio ad gladium, condemnation to the sword. It was considered a more entertaining form of execution than simple crucifixion or beheading. Your crime might have been as minor as stealing bread, but if the magistrate was feeling theatrical, you'd find yourself facing wild beasts or trained killers for the amusement of thousands. Some gladiators were born into slavery, the children of previous gladiators or household slaves who showed physical promise. Imagine growing up knowing that your entire purpose in life was to die entertainingly. These slave-born gladiators often had it worse than prisoners of war. At least the captured soldiers had memories of freedom to sustain them. Then, there were the debtors. Free Romans who had fallen so far into financial ruin that they voluntarily sold themselves into gladiatorial slavery. These men, called octorati, signed contracts trading their freedom for a chance to earn money through combat. Of course, most never lived long enough to buy their freedom back. The gladiator schools were happy to provide them with food, lodging, and training in exchange for their lives. Once you were marked for the arena, you were transported to a gladiator school called a ludus. The most famous was the Ludus Magnus, connected to the Colosseum by an underground tunnel. As your cart approached these fortress-like buildings, you'd see high walls topped with guards and spikes. This wasn't a school, it was a prison, where you'd learn to die with style. The moment you passed through those gates, you ceased to exist as a person. You became a gladius, literally sword, a piece of equipment owned by the lanista, the gladiator trainer who had purchased you. Your name was replaced with a number or a fighting moniker. Your past was erased. Your future was measured in fights, not years. The legal reality was stark. As a gladiator, you had no rights whatsoever. You couldn't own property, marry, or even choose what you ate. You were livestock that could think and feel, which somehow made your situation even more cruel. The Romans had created a system where human beings were transformed into entertainment commodities, and they did it with the cold efficiency that built an empire. Your new owner had invested money in you, anywhere from 2,000 to 15,000 denarii, depending on your size and perceived potential. This meant they had a financial incentive to keep you alive long enough to recoup their investment, but only just long enough. A gladiator who lived too long became expensive to maintain. A gladiator who died too quickly was a poor investment. You existed in the narrow space between these economic realities, a human being reduced to a profit and loss calculation. Now begins the transformation from human being to killing machine. Welcome to Gladiator School, where every day starts before dawn and ends with the knowledge that you're one step closer to your death. Your training begins with the wooden sword, the gladius. And if you think this sounds harmless, you're about to learn otherwise. These wooden weapons were deliberately heavier than real swords, designed to build your strength while ensuring you couldn't actually kill anyone during practice. Not that you wouldn't try. Desperation makes men do terrible things to each other, and more than one gladiator was beaten to death by his training partners using these safe, wooden weapons. The training regimen was designed by men who understood that they were preparing you for death, not victory. Each day began at sunrise, with calisthenics that would make modern athletes weep. You'd run in full armor around the training ground until your lungs burned and your legs collapsed. Then came strength training, lifting heavy stones, wrestling with other gladiators, and endless repetition of sword forms until your arms felt like lead. But physical conditioning was only half the battle. The trainers, called doctores, were usually former gladiators who had somehow survived long enough to retire. They knew every trick, every technique, every way to kill efficiently with various weapons. They also knew that most of their students would be dead within a year, so they didn't waste time with gentle instruction. If you made a mistake during training, you were beaten. If you showed cowardice, you were flogged. If you tried to refuse combat, you were tortured until you complied. The doctors carried whips and hot irons, and they used them liberally. The goal wasn't just to teach you to fight, it was to break your spirit so completely that you would walk into the arena without trying to escape. Different types of gladiators required different training regimens, each more specialized and brutal than the last. If you were designated as a retiarius, you'd spend months learning to fight with a net and trident, weapons that required incredible skill and timing. One mistake with the net meant certain death, as you'd be tangled in your own weapon while your opponent closed in for the kill. The Murmillo gladiators fought with heavy shields and short swords, but their training was perhaps the most grueling of all. They wore heavy armor and helmets that severely restricted their vision and hearing. Training involved hours of fighting blind, learning to sense your opponent's movements through vibrations in the ground and changes in air pressure. Many Murmillo gladiators died, not from sword wounds, but from heat exhaustion inside their metal suits. Then there were the Thraix fighters, trained to use small shields and curved swords. Their training emphasized speed and agility over strength, but this meant they were expected to put on acrobatic displays while fighting for their lives. The crowd loved watching these gladiators flip and dance around their opponents, never realizing that every unnecessary movement was a calculated risk that could result in death. The psychological conditioning was perhaps more brutal than the physical training. You were taught to accept death as inevitable, to view each fight as a temporary postponement of your execution, rather than a chance for survival. The trainers would force you to watch other gladiators die, to become desensitized to blood and screaming. They'd make you practice your death scene, how to fall gracefully, how to present your throat for the killing blow, how to die in a way that would satisfy the crowd. Medical care was provided, but only to keep you functional enough to fight. The gladiator schools employed doctors called medici, but their job wasn't to heal you. It was to patch you up enough to get you back into the arena. Broken bones were set poorly, infections were ignored unless they threatened your immediate fighting ability, and pain was considered a character-building experience. The diet was calculated to keep you strong but not comfortable. You ate mostly barley porridge, beans, and occasional scraps of meat. This diet was so associated with gladiators that they were mockingly called horderii, barley men. The food was deliberately bland and minimal, designed to fuel your body without providing any pleasure or comfort. Even your meals were a reminder that you were property, not a person. Sleep was another weapon used against you. You were kept in cramped cells with multiple other gladiators, ensuring that rest was difficult and privacy was impossible. The constant noise, the smell of unwashed bodies, the knowledge that any of your cellmates might be ordered to kill you in the arena, these conditions were designed to wear down your mental resistance. Training accidents were common, and often fatal. The doctores pushed their students to the breaking point and beyond, knowing that a gladiator who couldn't survive training certainly couldn't survive the arena. If you died during preparation, it was considered a cost of doing business. Your body would be dragged away, and training would continue without missing a beat. Welcome to your new home. A cramped cell in the gladiator barracks, where you'll spend what's left of your life. The walls are thick stone, designed to keep you in and hope out. The single window is barred and positioned too high to see anything but a sliver of sky. This tiny glimpse of freedom will become your most precious possession. You share this cell with 10 to 15 other men, all of them desperate, all of them dangerous. The space is barely large enough for everyone to lie down at once, so you sleep in shifts or curled up against each other like animals. The air is thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, fear sweat, and the latrine bucket that serves as your toilet. Privacy is a luxury that no longer exists in your world. Your cellmates come from across the empire. Germanic warriors, Greek criminals, Egyptian slaves, British rebels. You don't share a common language, but you share a common fate. Some have been here for months, bearing the scars of multiple arena battles. Others are fresh arrivals like yourself, still adjusting to the reality of their situation. All of you know that friendships formed here will likely end in tragedy. You might be ordered to kill each other for the entertainment of the crowd. The daily routine begins before dawn, with the sound of guards unlocking cell doors. You're herded into the training yard like cattle, your legs shackled to prevent escape attempts. The first order of business is the morning meal, a bowl of barley porridge that tastes like paste mixed with disappointment. This will be your primary sustenance, supplemented occasionally with beans, cheap vegetables, and very rarely, scraps of meat. The Romans had done studies on gladiator nutrition, approaching it with the same cold efficiency they applied to everything else. They discovered that gladiators performed better on a predominantly vegetarian diet, so meat was deliberately limited. The barley porridge was filling and provided energy, but it was bland and unsatisfying. Even your food was designed to remind you that pleasure was no longer part of your existence. After the meal comes training, which we've already discussed, but the psychological impact of this daily routine deserves special attention. Every morning you wake up, knowing that you're going to be hurt. Every day you practice the skills that will either kill someone else or get you killed. The constant violence, even in training, erodes your humanity, bit by bit. The afternoon brings more training, often focused on combat against different types of opponents. You might spend hours learning to fight against a ready Arius with his net and trident, or practicing against a heavily armored Murmillo. These practice sessions were deadly serious, injuries were common, and accidents were often fatal. The Doctorus encouraged a certain level of brutality in training, believing that gladiators who held back in practice would hesitate in the arena. Evenings were perhaps the worst time of all. With training finished and the brutal reality of your situation settling in, there was nothing to do but wait. Wait for your next fight. Wait for your inevitable death. Wait for the crowd to decide your fate. Some gladiators used this time to pray to their gods, asking for strength or a quick death. Others planned escape attempts that almost never succeeded. Most simply sat in silence, processing the horror of their circumstances. The ludus was designed to break your spirit systematically. Every aspect of your environment reinforced your powerlessness and disposability. The guards treated you with casual cruelty, knowing that you were worth more dead than alive if you provided good entertainment. The lanista, your owner, visited regularly to assess his investment, examining you like a horse or a piece of equipment. Medical care was available, but only to preserve your fighting ability. The ludus physician would treat wounds and injuries, but only if they threatened your performance in the arena. Broken bones were set minimally, infections were ignored unless they became life-threatening, and pain was considered part of the experience. Mental health was never even a consideration. Depression, anxiety, and trauma were expected side effects of gladiator life. Relationships within the ludus were complicated and often tragic. Some gladiators formed genuine friendships, finding comfort in shared misery. Others became lovers, seeking human connection in an inhumane situation. But these relationships were always overshadowed by the knowledge that you might be forced to fight each other to the death. The Romans sometimes deliberately paired friends or lovers in the arena, knowing that the crowd would be thrilled by the extra emotional drama. The psychological toll of this environment cannot be overstated. You lived in constant fear, never knowing when your next fight would be announced. You watched other gladiators leave for the arena and never return. You saw strong men break down and weep, driven to madness by the relentless pressure. Suicide was common, though it was made as difficult as possible. The Romans wanted their gladiators to die in the arena, not in their cells. Some gladiators coped by becoming savage, embracing the violence and brutality as a way to maintain some sense of control. Others retreated into themselves, becoming hollow shells that fought mechanically until they were finally killed. A few maintained their humanity despite everything, but these were the exceptions rather than the rule. The ludus also served as a constant reminder of your economic value. Everything was calculated in terms of cost and return on investment. your food, your medical care, your training. All of it was designed to maximize your owner's profit. You were a business expense, a depreciating asset that needed to generate revenue before it became worthless. The day has arrived. After months of brutal training, systematic dehumanization, and psychological conditioning, you're finally going to face your fate in the arena. The guards wake you before dawn, and you know immediately that today is different. There's an electricity in the air, a sense of anticipation that makes your stomach turn. Today, you'll discover whether you're strong enough to survive, or if you'll die for the entertainment of thousands of strangers. The preparation begins with a ritual that's both sacred and terrifying. You're taken to a special chamber where a priest performs ceremonies to various gods, Mars for strength, Nemesis for justice, and Dis Pater for a good death. The irony isn't lost on you that the Romans pray to their gods for your demise. You're given a chance to make your own prayers, though what do you pray for? Victory means someone else dies. Defeat means you die. There are no good outcomes in this scenario. Your body is prepared for combat with the efficiency of a butcher preparing meat. Oils are rubbed into your skin to make you glisten under the arena lights, highlighting your muscles for the crowd's appreciation. Your weapons are inspected and blessed. Your armor is fitted with the precision of a craftsman, each piece designed not just to protect you, but to create a spectacle. The Romans understood that gladiatorial combat was theater as much as sport, and you're about to become the star of a very deadly play. The walk to the arena is a journey through hell. You're led through underground tunnels that connect the ludus to the Colosseum, passing through a maze of cells, elevators, and staging areas. The sound grows louder as you approach, the roar of 50,000 voices calling for blood, your blood. The tunnel opens into blazing sunlight, and suddenly you're standing on the sand of the arena floor, squinting up at an amphitheater packed with spectators who see you as nothing more than entertainment. The crowd is a beast with 50,000 heads, and it's hungry. The spectators have paid good money to see you fight and die, and they expect value for their investment. The wealthy sit in the lower tiers, close enough to see the fear in your eyes and the blood on your sword. The poor pack the upper levels, shouting themselves hoarse as they live vicariously through your struggle. Children watch wide-eyed as their parents cheer for your death, learning that human life has entertainment value. But before the main event, you must endure the parade. All the gladiators who will fight today march around the arena, displaying themselves for the crowd's approval. You raise your weapons and shout the traditional salute. Ave Caesar, morituri te salutant. Hail Caesar, those who are about to die salute you. The crowd roars its approval, thrilled by the acknowledgement of your impending doom. Then comes the moment of truth. You're paired with your opponent. Perhaps another gladiator. Perhaps a condemned criminal. Perhaps a wild animal. The Romans loved variety in their death matches, and they were constantly innovating new ways to kill people entertainingly. Your opponent might be a friend from the ludus, someone you've trained with and shared meals with. The crowd finds this even more thrilling, knowing that one of you will murder the other for their amusement. The fight itself is nothing like the Hollywood movies. There's no honor, no nobility, no dramatic speeches. It's desperate, brutal, and quick. You're fighting for your life against someone who's equally desperate, equally skilled, and equally determined to live another day. The sand beneath your feet is already stained with blood from previous fights, making footing treacherous. The crowd's roar is deafening, making it difficult to hear your opponent's movements or your trainer's shouted advice. Every movement is calculated not just for combat effectiveness, but for entertainment value. The crowd wants to see skill, but they also want to see drama. A quick, clean kill might be efficient, but it's boring. You're expected to put on a show, to make your struggle for survival look like a carefully choreographed performance. The Romans understood that the spectacle was as important as the outcome. If you're wounded, the crowd's reaction determines your fate. They cheer loudest when you're hurt, but still fighting, when blood is flowing, but death isn't certain. The emperor or the game's sponsor watches the crowd's mood carefully, knowing that their popularity depends on providing satisfying entertainment. A boring fight reflects poorly on the organizers, while a thrilling battle enhances their reputation. The moment of defeat is perhaps the most crucial part of the entire experience. When you're beaten, when you can no longer defend yourself, you must appeal to the crowd for mercy. You raise your finger in the traditional gesture of surrender, hoping that the spectators will allow you to live. But mercy isn't guaranteed. It's earned through the quality of your performance. If you've fought well, if you've provided good entertainment, the crowd might spare your life. If you've disappointed them, they'll demand your death. The crowd's decision is supposedly final, but the emperor or sponsor can override their wishes. Sometimes a particularly skilled gladiator is spared even when the crowd calls for death, because they're too valuable to waste. Other times a gladiator who has fought brilliantly is killed anyway, because the crowd demands a spectacular finale. Your life hangs in the balance of entertainment economics. If you're spared, you're carried from the arena to recover and fight another day. If you're condemned, you must die with dignity, presenting your throat for the killing blow and accepting your fate without pleading or struggling. Even in death, you're expected to perform for the crowd's satisfaction. The Romans had turned murder into theater, and you're the tragically disposable star. The aftermath is coldly efficient. Your body is dragged from the arena by attendants dressed as Charon, the ferryman of the dead. The sand is raked to cover your blood, and the next pair of gladiators is brought out. The crowd has already forgotten your name, focused on the next act in their deadly entertainment. You've served your purpose. You've died spectacularly for their amusement. And now you're just another casualty in Rome's endless appetite for violence. This was the reality of gladiatorial combat, not the noble struggle for freedom that Hollywood depicts, but a systematic exploitation of human desperation for mass entertainment. You weren't a warrior fighting for honor. You were a slave performing your own execution for the pleasure of people who saw you as less than human. And with that sobering thought, we reach the end of our journey through the horrifying reality of gladiator life. The fire is still crackling softly, a gentle reminder of warmth and comfort that these ancient fighters never knew. Rest well, knowing that your struggles, whatever they may be, are nothing compared to the nightmare that awaited those who entered the arena in ancient Rome. Sweet dreams, and remember, sometimes the most important history lessons are the ones that disturb our sleep.